In honor of Women's History Month, today I'm going to share with you information about early African American ministries. America's Christian pulpits, especially African American pulpits, remain male dominant spaces. Still today, eyebrows raised, churches split, pews empty, and recommendation letters get lost at a woman's mention that God has called her to preach. The earliest black female preacher was a Methodist woman simply known as Elizabeth. She held her first prayer meeting in Baltimore in 1808 and preached for about 50 years before retiring to Philadelphia. An unbroken legacy of African American women preachers persisted even long after Elizabeth. Reverend Jarena Lee became the first African American woman to preach at the African Methodist Episcopal Church. She had started even before the church was officially formed in the city of Philadelphia in 1816, but she faced considerable opposition. AME Bishop Richard Allen, who founded the AME Church, had initially refused Lee's request to preach. It was only upon hearing her speak during a worship service that he permitted her to give a sermon. Lee was much like her colonial era contemporary, the famed women's rights activist Sojourner Truth. Truth had escaped John D. Drumont's plantation in 1828 and landed in New York City, where she became a traveling preacher active in the abolition and women's suffrage movements. For centuries now, the Bible has been used to suppress women's voices. These early black female preachers reinterpreted the Bible to liberate women. Truth, for example, is most remembered for her captivating topical sermon, Aren't I a Woman?, delivered at the Women's Rights National Convention on May 29, 1815, in Akron, Ohio. In a skillful historical interpretation of the scriptures, Truth used the Bible to liberate and set the record straight about women's rights. Like Truth, Jarena Lee spoke truth to power and paved the way for other mid to late 19th century black female preachers to achieve validation as pulpit leaders, although neither she nor Truth received official clerical appointments. The first woman to achieve this validation was Julia A. J. Foote. In 1884, she became the first woman ordained a deacon in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. Shortly after followed the ordination of the AME Zion evangelist Harriet A. Baker, who in 1889 was perhaps the first black woman to receive a pastoral appointment. Mary J. Small became the first woman to achieve elder ordination, which permitted her to preach, teach, and administer the sacraments and Holy Communion. An important voice was that of Reverend Florence Spearing Randolph. In her role as reformer, suffragist, evangelist, and pastor, she daringly advanced the cause of freedom and justice within the churches she served, and even beyond during the period of the Great Migration of the 20th century. In her sermons, she brought criticism to the broken promises of American democracy, the deceptive ideology of black inferiority, and other chronic injustices. She also spoke about gender discrimination. Randolph's carefully crafted sermon in 1909, Antiphony to Women Preachers, for example, highlights several heroic women in the Bible. From her interpretation of their scriptural legacy, she argued that gender discrimination in Christian pulpits illustrated a misleading of scripture. Today, several respected African American women preachers and teachers of preachers proudly stand on Lee's, Truth's, Small, and Randolph's shoulders, raising their prophetic voices. Thank you very much.